Okay, so anyways, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to come and hear this talk about agility at scale. My name is Scott Ambler, and one of the things that I do is I help organizations around the world to understand this agile and lean stuff and to apply it at scale in enterprise class settings. Now I'm going to give you two warnings. So first of all, I'm going to cover a lot of ground today. So I'm going to just do my best to overwhelm you with ideas. So if I get a few people whose ears are bleeding at the end of this, I'll know I've succeeded. And the second warning is that I've got a cold. So if partway through the talk it sounds like I'm coughing up a lung, it's probably because I'm coughing up a lung. So just thought I'd expect to be grossed out several times at some point throughout this talk. So anyways, what's the story? What's the story I'm about to tell? So let's jump right to the conclusion, and then I'll back my way out of it. So I like to tell, lately I've been telling this analogy to people. And what the analogy is that agile software teams have gotten really good at building race car engines. We're great at tweaking the software process. We're getting faster, we're getting better quality, better performance. We really are good at this. And the Agile community and now the DevOps community has really been doing a good job at tweaking software development. And this is a good thing. But unfortunately, what happens is we take these great racing engines and we drop them into our IT tractor, and we wonder why we don't win the race. So we're great at software development. We've really nailed it. We've gotten pretty good at this now. But the rest of the IT department is still sort of struggling. You know, we've got problems with data management, we've got problems with governance, we've got problems with enterprise architecture and portfolio management and many, many other things. And the point is that if we want to win the race, we're not going to win it with a tractor. We really need a race car, an IT racing car. But having a racing car doesn't win the race. I could buy a racing car tomorrow. I could put it in my driveway, and I'm not going to win F1, okay? Because, yeah, I drive fast, but I'm certainly not a world-class racing car driver, and I never will be. Nor do I have a support team in order to allow me to win the race. So what we really need, so it's great for us to work towards this racing car IT department, this Agile IT department or lean IT department, whatever you want to call that, but what we really need is a lean organization that can enable us to win the race. So take this IT racing car and use it somehow to win the race, okay? Now, and just because we've got a great team, a great car and a great team and a great driver, doesn't mean we're going to win the race, but at least we've got a shot. Okay, so let's put ourselves in a position where we could help our organization to be competitive, to stay in the race, and hopefully, better yet, even win the race every so often. Wouldn't that be nice? So in today's talk, I would like to explore three questions. The first one is, what does it mean to scale Agile? Because this is not well defined. This is not agreed to in the industry, probably never will be. So I'm just going to give you my opinions on what I'm seeing, and then you can decide for yourselves. And one of the things that we do at my company is we distinguish between scaling tactically and scaling strategically. And you need to do both. Okay, and I think, making this race car engine faster, that's tactical scaling. But what we really need is we need this racing car team, and that means we need to scale strategically. And this, I think, is going to be our generation's and probably the next generation's problem. How do we get these IT departments truly running effectively? Because I think many of them are not running so well, which we see a lot. So anyways, what does it mean to scale Agile? How can we climb this glacier? So for years, I've been talking about tactical scaling. How do we take an Agile delivery team, an Agile software delivery team, or an Agile solution delivery team, and help them to address the issues that they face, the complexities that they face? Because every team is in a different situation. So for example, a small team will work differently than a medium-sized team, then will work differently than a large team. So depending on the nature of your team, you will follow a different set of ways of working. You will organize yourselves differently as a team. You will work differently as a team than a team that's another size. So a team of 5 people works very differently than a team of 50 people, which works very differently than a team of 500 people. Pretty blatantly obvious, right? Not rocket science. That's the easy part of scaling. Same thing with geographic distribution. A team that's co-located where everybody is in the same room with their major stakeholders will work differently than a team that's, say, spread across the floor of a building, and they'll work differently than a team that's spread across several floors and across several buildings, across several locations, and even several countries. And there are teams that are, I'll show some industry data in a few minutes. There are teams that are working at all levels of geographic distribution. Don't let anybody tell you different. Okay? So when you hear people say, oh, you can't be agile if you're globally distributed, well, yeah, it sort of sucks being globally distributed, but you can still be as agile as possible in that situation. And it'd be nicer if you weren't globally distributed, like get people as close together as you can, but you can still be agile when you're globally distributed. Don't let anybody tell you, and anybody telling you you can't do that, the only thing that you should be hearing from them is that they don't know how to do that. But other people have figured this out. Maybe you can too. Maybe you can't, I don't know, but other people have figured it out. Sometimes we're organizationally distributed. It's pretty easy when everybody works for one division of one company. A little harder when people are working for multiple divisions. Suddenly, nasty politics start to rear its ugly head. A little harder yet if you're working for several companies. Say you're in a consortium and you're trying to build some sort of common infrastructure between companies. A little harder yet. Harder yet when you're outsourcing or offshoring some of the work to one or more other companies. Okay, more complexities there. And yes, it is possible to do agile outsourcing if you choose to. Probably much more desirable than doing traditional outsourcing, by the way. Sometimes we have regulatory compliance. Life is pretty easy when there's no compliancy issues. A little harder when you have financial compliances, such as Sarbanes-Oxley or Basel II. Harder yet if you have life-critical regulatory compliancy, such as FDA compliancy or some of the ISO automotive compliancy regimes that we have now. And yes, it is possible to do agile in life-critical situations. I've worked with several teams doing that. And yes, they work differently than a team that's in a non-regulatory situation. Fair enough. Different teams in different situations will work in different ways, and yet they can still be as agile as possible in the situation that they face. And they can always get better. However they're working right now today, they can always get better. We also have a range of domain complexity. Excuse me. We might be working in reasonably straightforward situations like banging out a website. A little harder yet if we're building financial processing systems. A little harder yet if we're building an air traffic control system. And you can be agile in all those situations. And of course, we have technical complexity. Really easy and straightforward when you're building a silo application in a greenfield situation using brand new technologies, using all the brand new whiz-bang tools. That's a no-brainer. Any monkey can do that. That's basically what all the books write about. But 95% of software development books write about these trivial situations. A little harder when you have legacy technologies in place. You've got some legacy software. You have to pay down the technical debt. Harder yet if you've got legacy data. Harder yet if you have to fix the legacy data. Harder yet if you've got multiple platforms involved, multiple technologies, some of which aren't the whiz-bang technologies of today, but they're the whiz-bang technologies from the 1970s and 1980s. I know a few people that are now working on source code that was originally written before they were born. I'm sure some of you know people like that too. I'm waiting to I eventually will run into somebody who is working on code that their grandparents wrote. I'm sure there's somebody out there in the world right now today that's in that situation. I just haven't run into them yet, but I have no doubt that I will. So the point I want to make is that, once again, different teams in different situations work in different ways. One process size does not fit all. Your team needs to be flexible. So my team, that's 20 people, that's distributed across a campus in a regulatory situation, will work differently than your team that's co-located 10 people in a non-regulatory situation, and rightfully so. And if we happen to be working for the same company, so be it. Right? This is very common. In any decent-sized company, or decent-sized organization, doesn't have to be a company, it could be a government agency as well, you'll have very different teams, often working down the hall from each other. And that's okay. They will be following different flavors of the process, and rightfully so. Now, if you happen to be somebody that interacts with those teams, So if I'm a governance person, I have to govern the small co-located team, and I have to govern the medium-sized distributed team, I have to govern them in a way that's appropriate for each of those teams. That means I need to be flexible, I need to vary my approach. This can be a huge challenge in most organizations. So anyways, tactical scaling is all about, let's enable development teams to work in an appropriate manner and to organize themselves in an appropriate manner to meet the needs of the situation they find themselves in. So is this actually happening? So this is some research I did a couple years ago now for Dr. Dobbs' journal, what we used to do at Dobbs, we would regularly survey the industry to find out what's actually going on out there. And so roughly 2 years ago now, we ran this survey just to explore, do teams face these complexity factors? And sure enough, they do. And what was interesting, what we found, was that in many organizations now, some organizations have learned that whenever they have a tough problem to address, they give it to the Agile teams. So we're seeing more and more organizations are now backing away from traditional, because the traditional approaches don't work so well, and they're realizing that traditional is not that good for dealing with great complexity. And certainly if you have changing requirements, traditional is not so good. What I also found interesting, and I think it has to do with the complexity, was that Agile teams tended to be a little bit larger than traditional teams. And I think it was because they were taking on nastier problems, and as a result, they just needed a few more live bodies involved. Not totally sure about that, but that would be my gut feel. Now, luckily, the Agile teams are less geographically distributed on average than the traditional teams. So that's good news. Whether or not we're learning or whether our organizations just haven't figured it out yet, I don't know. But my hope is that we've learned that being geographically distributed is not such a great idea, regardless of what some of my friends at the tool vendors might tell you. So it is happening. And then we've got this concept of strategic agility at scale. So how do we bring Agile across the entire IT department? So how do we move away from these traditional tractors into an Agile racing car? What does that look like? What does the workflow look like? Because we have to streamline the entire workflow. All it takes is one of these activities or one of these teams, if you want to correlate teams and activities to each other, to be out of sync with everybody else, and you've got a problem. So in many organizations today, at least what we're seeing, is that the IT governance effort is almost always a freaking disaster. They're following this traditional approach where you've got quality, you've got these documentation quality gates where everybody's got to create the same documents. So what happens? The development team fakes the documents. They have all this overhead for the reviews. We pretend to follow the process, but for the most part, we're faking it. So there's no real governance involved, but what we are doing is injecting risk and cost and time, which is the exact opposite of what good governance is all about. Or all it takes is the data management folks to be out of sync. What are the chances of the data management folks being a bit slow in a bank or an insurance company? What are the odds, right? Roughly 100%. But anyways, all it takes, you can shoot your mouths off about DevOps all that you want, but if I've got development teams that are trying to push working code into production every couple days or several times a day, and yet it takes my data folks 6 weeks to add a column into a data table, suddenly I'm not really doing DevOps anymore, am I? I'm not. And what the really sad thing is the number of organizations that I run into that tolerate the data management folks taking 6 weeks to do 5 minutes worth of work. And that's how long it takes to add a column into a database. 5 minutes. And that's if you're hand jamming everything and you need to look up the syntax, as it's been a few years since you've done that. 5 minutes worth of work. Certainly not 6 weeks. So anyways, we need to look at the bigger picture, not to pick on the data folks, because although they are an incredibly easy target, but all it takes is one of those activities to be a bit of a mess, and then suddenly everything grinds to a halt. This would be the equivalent of everybody else in the organization wants to build a racing car, but then my good friends in product management, they believe in these big tractor wheels. So their approach to their part of the overall picture is to put tractor wheels on the racing car. I'm sure that might work. It's some monster car rally thing. I'm sure we can see stuff like that, but it's not going to win F1, right? Or not going to win NASCAR. So we got to look at the bigger picture on this. So let's get into some details. So how do we scale tactically? So a couple things. I'm a firm believer in empiricism. I'm a firm believer in going out and observing what works in practice, observing what doesn't work in practice as well, because questionable practices are also interesting. Not as interesting as good practices, of course, but anyways, and I'm also a big fan of constant improvement, making small changes over time, a bunch of small changes over time to get better. There's a Japanese concept called Kaizen. So the Disone Agile framework is based on empiricism. So I used to be at IBM. I was the chief methodologist there for 6 years. It was the longest 5 decades of my life. And it was a great organization. But one of the things, I had the privilege, myself and my team, to go around the world to see organizations doing Agile, sometimes not doing Agile so well. And we got to see what was working and not working. We got to see a very wide range of situations. And we got to help them solve some very hard problems. I would always get called in on the hard stuff, never on the easy stuff, right? So, and what happened? We started noticing patterns. And some of the things that we saw, that we noticed, first of all, everybody was doing it differently. In most teams, and it wasn't just by organization, it was at the team level. So your team was doing Agile differently than your team, even though you're right side by side, because you're different people in different situations. And that's okay. Do what makes sense. Do what's right for you, not what the gurus are telling you to do. We also noticed that organizations are spending a lot of time and a lot of money figuring it out on their own, which is okay, particularly if you're a coach. If you're a consultant helping organizations figure this out, then that's great. Yeah, I want you to spend years and spend millions of dollars figuring it out. That's a beautiful thing. Except, of course, if you're the person paying the bill. So it doesn't have to be. Right? We can up our game a bit. So that was sort of motivated to putting the framework together. When I joined IBM, I made it very clear that I was not going to put together any sort of process framework for them. Very clear about that. And then after about 2 years in the field, I realized, oh man, I need to put something better together. So we started working on Disone Agile. So some of the key characteristics of this, it's what you would expect. It's very people-oriented. People and the way they work together are the primary determinant of success. It's a hybrid. One of the beautiful things about Agile, and I'm sure you're seeing at this conference over this past couple days, is that there's a bunch of great ideas and techniques out there. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of practices now out there in the Agile world. The problem is that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of practices out there. How do they fit together? When do you do each one? When should I not do some of them? To what extent should I do them? Who should be doing them? When should we be doing them? These are all valid questions, which there's not a lot of good answers for other than hire me as a consultant. Isn't that beautiful? But anyways, so one of the things that we're trying to do in Disone Agile is let's take the mystery out of how all the stuff works. In particular, let's take the mystery out of how we scale. Let's put ourselves in a position where we could grow Agile to meet the needs that we actually face, as opposed to what the gurus are trying to certify us in. So it's very learning-oriented. We learn as we go. We learn about the domain as we go. We learn about the technology as we go. We learn about ourselves as we go. How could it be any other way? And we have to actively try to do that. We have to actually help each other learn. It's solution-focused, not just software-focused. I think one of the Agile community has done a bunch of great things, but we've also done a few bad things. And I think one of the bad side effects of Agile is this focus on software. And I got to call bullshit on it. It's simply not true. We're not doing just software. Yeah, we're writing code, but that code runs on hardware. I don't know if you noticed that. And sometimes we have to upgrade and evolve the hardware. We have supporting documentation. That's reasonably important too. Not as important as the software, but certainly important. We often change the business processes around the usage of these systems. We often change the organization structure of the people using these systems. So we need to be looking at the whole solution, not just the software, not just the cool, sexy stuff that we like, but the overall solution. And that evolves throughout development. It's not just it's just like the software does. So we need to up our game a bit. And we should be enterprise aware. And that's based on the observation that my team is only one of many teams in the organization. We need to work with these other teams. We need to do what's right for the company, not just what's convenient for the team. So sometimes the simplest solution is to suck it up and reuse some of the legacy stuff that's out there and hopefully clean up and fix the legacy stuff, pay down the technical debt. But it's not to create yet another database or inject yet another technology into our infrastructure. That's convenient for the developers and it's fun, but it's certainly not, it might not be what's best for your company. And I'm sure many of you work in companies right now that are actively reconciling your operational environments because you've learned the hard way over time that the last thing we want is a dog's breakfast of solutions out there. So what's convenient for a development team might be absolute kiss of death for your company. So you'd better be a little more aware of the direction your company's going in and what your priorities are in order to do your job properly. So there's ways we can up our game and yet still keep it lightweight. This is, I think, the challenge in most traditional IT organizations is all this stuff I'm talking about is heavy and documentation-based and review-based and command and control and all this sort of stuff. It doesn't have to be. We can keep all this stuff lightweight if we want to and if we choose to. So let's get into some details. So first of all, like I said, Dad's a hybrid. We're trying to answer the question, how does this all fit together? So I'm not going to try to, tell you yet, be one of the 5 billion people out there telling you how to do TDD or CI or stuff like that. Those are all great techniques, and there's a heck of a lot of knowledge out there about that. But how does this all fit together? Those are interesting questions for us. Okay, so let's reuse this great wealth of knowledge we have out there and put it all together. Let's also be respectful. The world still runs on traditional systems. Any of you who took a flight to get here, put your life in the hands of multiple systems built using traditional techniques. Anybody who did an electronic financial transaction today or at any point in time have put your financial health in the life of traditionally built systems. I think we can observe that maybe the traditional folks do have a clue and do have a few good ideas how to develop things. I think that's pretty fair. There's some great ideas in Scrum and Kanban and extreme programming and agile modeling and even the evil unified process. Oh no, boogeyman, the evil unified process. We're not so scared of that boogeyman anymore because it's pretty much died. But you know what? Let's show those folks some respect. There are some great techniques in the unified process which the Agile community is actively reinventing and giving slightly different names to. I would invite you to read Philippe Krusten's third edition describing the unified, probably even the first or the second edition is pretty good. There's some great ideas there that you could probably benefit from right now today if you choose to. And Agile data, of course, because this database stuff can and should be Agile. Absolutely nothing special about the data world other than the people involved. So, an important observation, like I said, your team is one of many teams. So we need to do what's right for the company, which might not be what's convenient for us. So I think the traditional folks, they were pretty good. They focused on the individuals when it gets down to it. In the traditional world, I want to be the best tester I can be, or the best programmer, or the best manager, or the best architect. And I'm going to do really great work, and I'm going to throw it over the wall to the next person, and they're going to do the best work they can do, and they'll throw it over the wall, and so on. But that's incredibly ineffective and expensive and risky. Sounds good in theory, but that's all it was theory. And the Agile folks came along, and they observed that, teams of people build solutions, not just individuals. We need to figure out how we're going to work together effectively as a team. And that was that one heck of a step in the right direction. But that's not sufficient. I've got to at least be doing what's right for my company, what's right for my organization. And that means I'm going to have to suck it up and follow common conventions, maybe even be actively involved in developing conventions. I should be following a common technical roadmap, a common business roadmap, and helping to evolve those things and so on. I should be working with these other teams to make sure we're not stepping on each other's feet and many other good things. It's not just about my team, but it's really about let's be successful as an organization. Let's win this race together as an organization, not just I'm the best driver on the planet. And if any of you with kids, if you ever watched the Cars movie, the fundamental message in Cars is that an arrogant little race car is not going to win the race on his own. He needs a team, and he needs an organization around him. So, I've said it a few times. An important observation I think is pretty easy to make, and you can go to your companies tomorrow and make this, is every single person in your company is unique. And as a result, when you build a team of unique people, your team is unique. And when you build an organization out of a collection of unique teams, your organization is unique. It's, once again, it's not rocket science. We're all snowflakes. And yes, snowflakes, from when you step back, they all look the same. But when you get them under a microscope, they're all different. And those snowflakes they're different, unique snowflakes. I'm waiting for a snowflake movie from Disney. I'm sure there will be one, even if they can make a movie about feelings, they can certainly make a movie about snowflakes, I think. I've got a 5, almost a 6-year-old daughter, so the only thing I get to watch is Disney these days. I know everything there is to know about all the princesses. I'm so lucky. Anyways, so one thing that we observed in organization after organization is that the teams were not following the same processes. Even in small companies, I'm working right now with a company of 75 people in total, including the business people. In that company, they had 3 development teams, one of which is following a Scrum-based life cycle, the other 2 are following Kanban, because that's what makes sense for them. So in a reasonably small company, you still have observable differences between the teams. So each team was allowed to pick the life cycle that made the most sense for them. So in Disone Agile, we support 4 life cycles. We support a Scrum-based Agile delivery cycle from beginning to end. How do we address, from a project point of view, how do we initiate, how do we do inception effectively in a lightweight, streamlined manner? How do we do construction? The Agile folks are really good at construction. And then how do we do transition or release? How do we streamline that? How do we do it from end to end? How does it all fit together? Because if you don't look at it from beginning to end, what you end up with is water scrumfall or scrummyfall or whatever you want to call that. The vast majority of teams doing Scrum right now are when you take a look at them, are actually doing water scrumfall. And it's not because of Scrum. Well, it is in a way, but the real problem is because the Scrum guys, for the most part, ceded the territory of how do you initiate in a streamlined manner and how do you release in a streamlined manner. Organizations just filled in the blanks. They just sort of wave their hands. You can figure it out. You're smart. Yeah, you're smart, but you know how to do it in a traditional manner, so you put in traditional ways of working. So you end up with these teams that are way too heavy on the back end and on the front end. We also support a lean delivery or a Kanban type of a project life cycle. More advanced teams do a continuous delivery, stable product team type of an approach. So you might start with a Scrum-based approach or a Kanban-ish type of a thing and eventually evolve, if you keep your team together and you allow them to improve and get better and help them, of course, then they'll almost always evolve into a continuous delivery type of an approach, which is a pretty good thing usually. And we also support an exploratory life cycle based on lean startup. If you read the work of Eric Rice, he focuses a lot on company startups, but it's really about product startup, because these lean startup companies are all one-product companies for the most part, at least when they get going. So all of his advice is really about how do we initiate a product? How do we bring a new product into the marketplace? So we've got clients now that are applying a lean startup approach, like insurance companies and banks, taking products to market using a lean startup approach. And that's okay. So this is easy to observe if you choose to. So any decent process framework needs to support a range of ways of working. And you can even observe that there's still some teams out there doing traditional waterfallish stuff. How sad for them. We can help them. But, it's not included in Disone Agile. But anyways, we can help you move away from that, or at least minimize the pain. It's also pretty easy to observe that different teams work in different ways. So there's different ways, and there's great religious debates about this in the Agile community. There's different ways that we can manage changing requirements. We can do a Scrum product backlog type of a thing. We can get a little more advanced, do a unified process backlog type of a thing. And the Scrum guys have basically evolved into this now, which is interesting. Only took them about 20 years to catch up, but that's okay. We can do more of a lean Kanban-ish type of a thing, have a work item pool where we bring work in one item at a time. And we can even do formal change management. Now that's not very agile in most situations, but let's be respectful and observe that it does in fact make sense in a very narrow range of situations. So for example, I worked with a team a few years ago. We were building the management software for a pacemaker. We were under very strict, and we were agile as we could be, but we were under very strict FDA regulations. So our approach to changing stakeholder requirements was formal change management to add or delete a requirement, but we did a Scrum product backlog for prioritization because the FDA regulations could care less how you prioritize things. But they do care very strongly about adding and deleting requirements. So we had to be formal because we thought it'd be nice to stay out of jail, or at least to avoid major fines. So we did a combination of formal change management and the Scrum stuff, and that was okay. Now, in the vast majority of situations, formal change management, like a change control board type of a thing, is an incredibly bad idea. But we can be respectful and observe if we choose to. We can observe that there are some situations where that does in fact make sense. So let's do that. So one of the things that we do in Disone Agile is we give you choices. Choice is good. Some of the choices are darn good. Some of them are not so darn good. And that's okay. Depending on your situation, depending on your level of skill, the Scrum product backlog approach might be the best you can do right now. And that's okay. You can do better. We can learn, we can improve and get better. That's why we hold retrospectives and reflections, because we want to identify ways we can get better. And one way that we can get better is by moving up the food chain a bit. And that's okay. Okay? It might be the best you can do right now, but at some point in the future you'll be able to get better. So let's enable teams to be the best that they can be right now, but help them move along, help them grow, help them get better, and give them options. Get them out of the religious fervor that we see from many coaches and in many methods. And let's help them wake up and observe that they've got choices. So the way we communicate this, this is something we call a process goal diagram. Not the sexiest term on the planet. It's basically a decision tree. For those of us that were around many, many decades ago. So the goal, one of the process goals, and Dad, we'll see the list of them later on, is to address changing stakeholder needs. So during construction, we should probably allow the requirements to evolve because we want to embrace change. And when we do that, when we try to identify a strategy for embracing change, well, we have to either implicitly or explicitly think about a few things. So what fundamental strategy are we going to take? We're going to do the Scrum product backlog, the Kanban approach, the formal approach, combinations thereof. How are we going to prioritize the work? There's different ways to prioritize work, not just the way some of the methods prescribe it, but there are many options. Let's choose the right ones for you. When will we accept changes? In the middle of an iteration or in a future iteration? Or maybe we're not going to accept change at all. Probably a very bad idea, but that is an option. How are we going to interact with our stakeholders? So doing it indirectly via product owners or business analysts, not the most effective way to get requirements out of stakeholders. The best way is to have actual real conversations with the stakeholders. In XP, they had a practice called on-site customer. In Agile modeling, we up the game and we say, yeah, not only should the customer be on-site, put them to work. I got a live body. Get off your ass, do some work. Get to the whiteboard, sketch. Pick up some index cards, fill them out. Just because you're a customer or stakeholder doesn't mean you're totally useless. You can, in fact, and rightfully so. The business people are the best suited people to actually do business modeling. Think about that. Okay, so let's put them to work. So we got options there, and there's different ways we can go about eliciting requirements. Let's work through another example. There's different ways we can explore the scope on a project. Yeah, we can do user stories, index cards, all that sort of stuff. Wonderful technique. We're probably also going to do some sketches as well, some whiteboard sketches, or maybe if you've dropped a couple $100 in one of the fancier modeling tools, good for you. You might have to create a big detailed requirements document. Like I said, pacemaker stuff, we had many hundreds of pages requirements document because we thought it'd be nice to stay out of jail. That's okay. There's a very small number of situations where big requirements up front does in fact make sense. Very inconvenient, but it makes sense. So let's still be as agile as we can be in that not so perfect situation. And some teams, their entire requirements document is a list of goals. I worked on a multi-million-dollar effort once where our requirements document was 5 bullet points. We were too lazy to even put together an entire paragraph. The largest project in mankind's history was kicked off by a single goal. At the end of this decade, we will put men on the moon and safely return them to Earth. JFK was slightly more eloquent than that. Okay, several orders of magnitude more eloquent than that. But that, as long as you ignore the conspiracy theorist folks, they did in fact succeed at that. At the height, the moon mission was 200,000 people, and they dropped a few $1 billion on that. So that was a reasonably large project, reasonably complex, and they did it reasonably well, according to Neil Armstrong at least. So how do we capture that as a goal diagram? Well, we have to worry, what level of detail will we go into in our requirements? What types of views will we capture? Will we do usage views like user stories or use cases or personas? Will we do UI views? Will we have a UI prototype, screen sketches, or something in between, UI flow diagrams? Will we do process modeling? How are we going to capture our non-functionals? Our non-functional requirements are quality of service requirements. We've got different ways we can capture them. And if we don't start at least identifying them early on, we're probably in trouble because our non-functionals will drive some interesting aspects of our architecture, and they'll also drive interesting aspects of our testing strategy. Okay, so we darn well better have a handle. Now, I'm not saying we're going to nail them all at the beginning, and we certainly don't want to because the requirements will change no matter what we do. But we should certainly do a little bit of thinking about them and get going in the right direction. And this is what exploring the initial scope is all about. I want to do just enough requirements modeling, just enough to get going in the right direction, to have a handle on what we're going to try to do. And yeah, that's going to evolve over time, and that's okay. But I want to get going in the right direction and avoid some of the common problems that we see on teams that just jump into coding right away. Another example, we've got different ways we can fund teams. The most effective way, or least risky way, I should say, is to do cost plus. Have a low time and materials plus the occasional bonus. Requires the greatest amount of governance, but it's the most effective way that we can fund an IT project. Time and materials, just straight time and materials, a little riskier, but requires a little less governance. Stage gate funding, maybe we're funding this effort once a quarter. You got to go back hat in hand, go back to the well, get more money. A little more riskier again, but requires less governance. And then our riskiest approach, boarding on grossly incompetent, is to have fixed price or fixed estimate projects. The riskiest way to go, overwhelming evidence, by the way, about that. This is not even a debate anymore amongst intelligent people. Note the use of the word intelligent. The riskiest way you could possibly do it, but it requires the least amount of governance. It's basically gambling. You'd be lucky if it was gambling, actually. If you look at the stats, it's worse than gambling. I could go play the slots and get better results. But maybe not slots. I could certainly play blackjack and get better results. But it's a little better than gambling. All those techniques have advantages and disadvantages. All those techniques make sense in some situations, but not others. And that's okay. Fixed price might be the best thing that we can do right now, given the culture and the skill level of our organization. But we have options. So if you get a chance to read the Disone Agile book, we go into details about the advantages and disadvantages. And there is one or two advantages to fixed price. A spectacular list of disadvantages, but one or two advantages, and that's okay. These other techniques, things get better the higher up on the diagram you are. So now we can have intelligent conversations with the people that still believe in this. And maybe we could talk them, let's experiment with stage gate. Let's do one or two teams and see what happens. And when that works out well, hey, let's run another experiment. Let's try time materials. And a few years from now, maybe we'll have improved our funding approach. But if we don't try, we never will. And if we are unable to have intelligent conversations about the trade-offs and the advantages and disadvantages of each technique, we'll never, ever dig our way out of that hole. So, and this is why in Disone Agile, we include not so ideal strategies sometimes. Because like I said, that might be the best you can do right now, and that's okay. we can get better. So this is actually the simplest of the 22 goal diagrams, or at least the smallest. Might not be the simplest, but anyways, certainly the smallest. Now, one thing I should have pointed out, in this notation, let's go back a couple slides, something a little bit bigger. In this notation, what we're showing here is whenever you see something that is bolded, in this case, usage model, this is a default. So what we've done in these goal diagrams is we've swept through and we said, if you're a smallish team in a reasonably straightforward situation and you're near located, then these default suggestions are probably good starting points for you. And they pretty much default to a combination of Scrum, extreme programming, and Agile modeling with a few other techniques in there to flesh it all out. Now, if that's not your situation, then the default suggestions might not be the way to go, and you're going to have to think for yourselves, which you're going to have to actually start doing some trade-offs. Whenever you see a list with an arrow beside it, that's an indication that this is an ordered list, and the strategies towards the top of the list, in general, are more effective than the strategies towards the bottom of the list. So it's sort of a maturity model, but not quite. And I hate to use the term maturity model because that's a loaded term, but the reality is it is bordering on a maturity model. Because in some situations, there are better techniques than others. In other situations, I really can't tell you which of these modeling strategies are better because they all have advantages and disadvantages, and they're correlated. You do multiple at once usually, and that's okay. So anyways, that's a little bit of notation for you. So this mind map summarizes the process goals of Disone Agile Delivery. There's the bubbles on the outside edge are the 22 process goals. Now, the challenge we had when we were first putting the framework together was that we observed that every team was working differently. But we also observed that even though every team worked differently, they still had to have the same basic capabilities. They still had to be able to fulfill the same basic process goals. So if we were following a project life cycle, where you start a project, you do the work, and then eventually you end the project, and then you split the team up. The teams following those sorts of life cycles, well, when you initiate the team, and this is true of product teams as well, but when you initiate this effort, well, you got to do basic things like put the team together. And there's different ways we can put the team together. We should do some initial requirements modeling. There's different ways we can do that. We should do some initial architecture, and there's different ways we can do that. If we're smart, now we didn't observe this in all teams, but the teams that were actually successful were doing some sort of lightweight risk management. So you should initiate your risk management stuff. You should probably have to secure funding for the rest of the effort, or at least the next stage of the rest of the effort. You probably have to put your work environment together. Let's start getting our tools together. Let's start getting our desks together. Let's put our workroom together if we haven't got a workroom yet, if we're lucky enough to get a workroom. Probably have to do some initial release planning. Now some of you say, oh, that's not very agile. We're doing some initial upfront modeling, upfront planning. Ooh, that's not agile. My only response to that is bite me. Just bite me. Like really, we need to observe what's going on. Like I said, one of the things I used to do for Dr. Dobbs' journal, I ran industry-level surveys. 97% of Agile teams do some form of upfront modeling or planning or both. 97%. So that, I'm not a mathematician, but I think that's the majority. Okay, so all these knobs that are arguing, is there a sprint zero or not? Are you kidding me? We need to start observing what's going on. Now, I want to keep this as lightweight as possible, of course, but we need to start observing what's really going on out there. So yeah, and why is this happening? Because in the vast majority of organizations, you're being governed. Probably not well, but you're being governed. And somebody is going to ask basic questions like, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? How long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost? And if you don't have a semi-intelligent answer to those things, you don't get funding, usually. There's the occasional freak team that does get multi-millions of dollars on 5 bullet points, but for the most part, you don't get funding. Then during construction, we got to build a potentially consumable solution, iteratively and incrementally. We should be improving quality as we go. The smarter teams prove their architecture early, hopefully with working code. we should be addressing changing stakeholder needs. During transition, we should make sure that we're ready to ship, and then we should ship. Not exactly rocket science. And even the teams doing continuous delivery, they've still got that. Minimally, you're going to run the test suite one last time, and then you're going to run your deployment scripts in order to spew it out into production. So even in the most lightweight, automated form possible, we're still doing these things. Throughout all of this, I hope you're growing your team members through coaching and training and mentoring. I hope you're doing risk management. I hope you're doing improving your process, improving your work environment. I hope that you're leveraging and enhancing the existing infrastructure, reusing existing stuff, fixing existing stuff, paying down technical debt. And you're probably coordinating activities within your team and across teams. And there's a little more to it than holding a 15-minute stand-up meeting every day. We can observe that too if we choose to. So let's take the mystery out of it. Now, having said that, every team that I ever saw was doing all or most of these things. Like I said, every so often I'd run into teams not doing risk management. Yikes. And every so often I would see teams that were not proving the architecture. Yikes. Bad decision. Learning opportunity. Let's put a positive spin on it. Wonderful learning opportunity there. But for the most part, they were doing all these things, and they were doing them all differently. So each of these bubbles on the outside edge breaks down into a goal diagram. So there's 22 goals, each of which have 4 or 5 process factors. Probably, I think it's like 4.8 or something. And then each of those have, on the average, about 5 techniques. Oh, and we're not saying, I should also said, I'm not making any sort of claim that these are all the possible ways you could possibly fund a project or fund a team. I'm not saying that at all, but I am saying it's a pretty good representative range of techniques, enough to wake you up and say, hey, I got choices, and all these choices of advantages and disadvantages, maybe I should look into some of them and figure it out. Because maybe, if I'm doing fixed price right now, there's at least three known techniques that are better. Maybe there's more, but there's certainly better ones out there. Maybe we should start thinking for ourselves and not following the official process. So anyways, so what's this all about? So when we're scaling tactically, there's all these great techniques and great ideas out there in the Agile community, but it's just a start. Some of the things I see, it's wonderful, but there's this huge focus on construction. There's this focus on a value-driven life cycle. We're going to work in business value order. That is not the best way we can work, by the way. It's a good way, but if we're smart, we're going to also think about risk and delivery dates and a few other things. This concept of a self-organizing team, that's a wonderful idea. It's a good start, but we can do better than that. Many of the Agile methods are very prescriptive. Regardless of the marketing rhetoric, Scrum is the epitome of prescription. The absolute epitome of prescription. I can't believe people fell for that. And this project team awareness is definitely a great start, but it's not the best. So we can do better. We really need to focus on delivery. How do we do this from beginning to end? The smarter teams are doing a risk-value approach. The effective teams, I want to be self-organizing, but we need some adult supervision. We need appropriate governance. So we should be following conventions, working in common roadmaps, doing what's right for the company. So we should be enterprise aware. This prescription stuff, it's a great start, but we need to be goal-driven. We need to have options. Choice is good. My team will make different choices than your team because we're different people in a different situation. And we will learn as we go as well. So we'll be making better choices over time, I hope. So let's help these teams. Let's streamline this learning and process improvement stuff. So then, once we get good at doing Agile in reasonably straightforward situations from beginning to end, then we've got a shot at scaling. So if I don't know how to do Agile in a small team, I'm probably out of luck on a large team. If I don't know how to do Agile when I'm near located, I'm probably out of luck when I'm globally distributed. If I don't know how to do Agile when we're in a non-regulatory environment, I'm pretty much screwed in an FDA environment, right? So we got to be smarter about this. We got to realize it takes time to learn. It takes time to grow. And if we skip steps, if we try to go from this reasonably straightforward stuff to all this uber complicated stuff, it's not going to work out well for us. Okay, so we got to be a little more humble in our approach sometimes. So this is what tactical agility is all about. Let's help teams be agile in the situation they find themselves in. And that situation changes over time, by the way. We're always aiming for a moving target. Now the good news, and this is not what we expected, so this is a learning that we've had over the last couple of years, is that from what we can observe, 4 of the 22 goals seem to take on about 80% of the brunt of tailoring your process for scaling. And those goals are exploring the initial scope, so doing our initial requirement stuff, identifying the initial technical strategy, so initial architecture, the way we approach testing for the most part, testing V&V, and then how we coordinate within and without of the team. That seems to take on about 80% of the brunt of addressing those scaling factors. So it's not too hard of a problem. It's hard enough, don't get me wrong, but it's not too bad. So that's tactical scaling. Strategic scaling is all about how do we do this across the IT department? How do we build a racing car, not just a tractor? So what does the workflow look like? This is the current version of our workflow diagram, which we're just about to rev a new one. So a little over a year ago, we decided, we started expanding Disone Agile Delivery into now what we call Disone Agile, where we're addressing these activities, these IT level activities, and not just software development, or not just solution development, I should say. So the observation is that for these other activities, we can also take a choice-based approach. We don't have to prescribe one way of doing program management. So this is the goal diagram for program management. And of course, the workflow for program management. So if the modelers among us, this would be a level 2 data flow diagram, or almost a level 2 data flow diagram. But anyways, so from the point of view of program management, what is the type of flows do we see with these other activities? How can we organize a large program? So, what's the organization structures? And this is just one of them that would support a large program team. How can we approach enterprise architecture? I've done a fair bit of work in the enterprise architecture space over time, and some research we did a couple years ago explored the issue of what are the success factors for what are the critical success factors of enterprise architecture teams, as well as what are the critical failure factors for enterprise architecture team. And we found a very interesting correlation that basically successful enterprise architecture teams work in a highly collaborative, evolutionary manner. They're very agile. Failed or struggling or challenged enterprise architecture teams work in a traditional, heavy, documentation-based, review-oriented approach. So a lot of and to be fair to the enterprise architecture crowd, they're finally getting into this agile stuff. They're inching into it. But many of the enterprise architecture strategies out there are still too heavy, too traditional. But anyways, once again, you've got options. And enterprise architecture is reasonably complex, so we're probably doing it a disservice. And once again, the workflow from the point of view of an enterprise architecture activity or team. So there's a lot. Excuse me. There's obviously a lot more to it than that. I just briefly touched the surface of it. But the one idea that I want to leave you with is there's a lot more to scaling than a fancy poster. And yes, we have a fancy poster too. But I've seen too many organizations that adopt a scaling framework, not because it made sense for them, but because management liked the poster. At that level of decision making, you deserve what you get. I'm not a nice person. You deserve what you get. And a lot of companies are getting right now. And that's okay. So the story I told. So Agile delivery is important. I think the Agile community is doing some phenomenally cool things and is making a lot of good steps forward. We're bringing pride and pride back into software development. I think that's a very good thing. But in order to scale, we need to tailor our approach. One size does not fit all. If you haven't guessed it yet, I'm not a big fan of this repeatable process stuff. Repeatable process is for suckers. That's useless bureaucracy at best. What our stakeholders want are repeatable results. They want to spend the money wisely. They want solutions that meet their actual needs, not something built to spec. That's also for suckers. They want solutions in a timely manner, not things that are on schedule, but things that are good to go when they make sense to go. That may or may not be on schedule. Shipping crap into production on time, not such a good strategy for you, regardless of the amount of screaming that you've got from your executives. Nothing good ever happens in those situations, other than more screaming. We need to enable an Agile IT department. Yes, we've got these Agile engines. Now we need to build Agile race cars. And then, of course, we need a lean or an Agile Enterprise that supports us. We need this racing team that can support a racing car with our racing engine. If we don't have all of that, we're in trouble. And we're going to address any good transformation is going to address all three of those layers at once. And it'll be a multi-year effort, taking time to do this, of course, and a lot of learning as you go. But you've got to address all of these things, because all it takes is one or two groups in the rest of the organization shooting all the Agilists in the foot, and suddenly you're in serious trouble. So anyways, I got a couple minutes for questions. I also want to point out I will be back in a few weeks to deliver 2 one-day workshops. So if you happen to be in the area and you're interested in this Disone Agile stuff, feel free to sign up for the workshop. We still have a couple spots left. Both of them are almost full, but not quite. So we're still good. Any questions? And this gentleman will run a mic to you really quickly. Any answers? The answers are good too. That gentleman, he's got an answer. Or a question. Not as good.
So how do you deal with stakeholders who do want some sense of estimates of the production of the project?
Yeah, give it to them. It's their money. That's a reasonable question. How much is it going to cost is a very reasonable question. Now, I'm also going to help educate them, and I'm going to help them understand that it costs money to give them an estimate. So how much are they willing to spend? I'm also going to educate them on the fact that these initial estimates are not very good, and you should have a huge range. And that's not a message they like to hear usually, but I'll give it to them anyways. And I make it pretty clear that any dollar that we spend on these estimates is a dollar we're not spending on solution delivery, so that they're making an important trade-off there. But yeah, it's completely reasonable to ask for a cost estimate. I just want to do it in as lightweight and as fast a manner as possible, so that way I can get into construction. This is why one of the goals during inception is to do some initial release planning, because in the vast majority of situations we will be asked that question. So let's keep that as lightweight as we can, get it over with, and move on. Excellent question. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. Hopefully you got some good ideas out of this.